Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us live. I am so excited to be chatting today with Janis Bradley, who is the author of Dogwise's most recently published book, Look Closer, Rethinking Dog Warning Signals, which I have got my copy of right here, and I have made so many notes. I've got so many questions for you, Janis. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for doing this, Erica. I'm really excited to talk to people about this.
I'm excited to talk to people about this too. I want to let everyone know, everyone who's listening, we want to hear from you. This is a discussion. This is a live Q&A interview. We want to hear your questions. So I want to get us started by successively approximating getting you guys to participate. So we want you to go ahead and leave a comment in the comment box. Where are you joining from? How did you hear about this live Q&A event? Have you read the book? Do you have the book? And if all of those questions seem a little too intimidating, what kind of dog do you have? We just want to let you have some options for questions we want to hear the answers to. So go ahead and leave us a comment. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube live, we want to hear from you as this conversation goes. We're going to be sharing your comments and questions with Janis as we continue this conversation. So go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know where you're joining from and how you heard about this. This is a brand new book. It only just came out last month? I mean, it's really brand new. I just got my copy a couple of weeks ago. And again, I'm just tearing through it. I'm enjoying it so much. So it will not surprise me if people who are tuning in have not had a chance to read the book yet or even order the book yet because it's brand new. But if you haven't gotten a copy of the book yet, stay tuned to the end. We're going to share a coupon code where you can get 20% off of Janis's new book at dogwise.com. And I'm very happy to say it is now available as an ebook, and audiobook production started yesterday. So we're very excited about that. We've got some folks joining us from Greece. Oh my gosh, we have an international audience. North Carolina ordered the book. Kelly, welcome. Thanks for joining. Lori is joining from Minneapolis. You haven't read it yet, but excited to with your Chihuahua Pomeranian mix. I've added a loaded question because we're going to be talking about dog breeds today in our conversation. Roseanne is joining from Springfield, Virginia. You have the book and you've got a bulldog at home. Roseanne, have you started reading it yet? How far have you gotten? We're very curious. We've got someone joining. Oh, another one from Greece. Wow, everyone's joining from Greece today. How fun. Mallory is joining from Memphis, Tennessee. Jennifer from New York. We're so excited to have all of you here today. Sue is joining from South Carolina. Don't have the book yet. That's all right, Sue. We're going to get you a coupon code at the end so that you can save 20% on it when you buy online at Dogwise. Again, we want to encourage people to ask questions. So if you ask a question during our live stream, you will be entered to win a free audiobook. So make sure that you've got your questions at the ready. I have a question to start us off, Janis. How did this book come to be? Can you tell us a little bit about the story of why did you write this book? Who is this book for?
Well, in a lot of ways, you were there right at the beginning. The idea for this came about when I was at Mike Shicasio's Aggression in Dogs conference a couple of years ago. And he asked me to come up on the stage and sort of be his, surprise guest during his keynote about dog bites. And I've written a book about dog bites, and I know quite a lot about that. So I happily did that and talked about a lot of my usual stuff, which boils down in a lot of ways to simply general overreactions to that. In other words, exaggerated fears of dogs that are not necessarily justified. And in the course of talking, and that was very well received. And in the course of talking about that, I mentioned that I thought that the word aggression tends to stick to dogs as a sort of a label, and can keep us from really looking at the dog in front of us and what's motivating that dog, and from intervening in ways that are likely to be successful. And so during the rest of the conference, I was and got some very good responses to that at that conference, and was mulling that over in the next 2 days in Phoenix, and went by the Dogwise table and asked Erica if she thought the Dogwise would be interested in a book that was something like "You Say Aggressive, I Say Gesundheit."
That's right. I forgot that was kind of the original working title.
That was my working title. And anybody who's ever been involved in publishing a book will know that the title always changes like 25 times.
This is true.
Yes, until it settled on Look Closer. And so that was the beginning of taking some things that I'd been thinking about for a long time and putting them into book form. But I really have to say that this book had probably been percolating in my mind for 2 or 3 decades. From the point when I adopted the dog who, if you've seen the book, is Willie, who's the dog in the dedication. He was my Willie.
Oh,
and
sweet.
Yes, he was a fantastic dog. Oh, adored that dog. It was my heart dog. People talk about their heart dog. That was Willie, and he became my heart dog from the day that I went to animal care and control and got him out of his kennel, and he stood up and put his feet on my shoulders and licked my face. And so that tells you something about how big he was.
Yeah.
And that was it for me. And he was fabulous. We won't mention that he dismembered there he is. He dismembered my bed the first day that I left him alone.
I really like that story.
Some time with him, yes.
Yeah, and this was that story.
This was like in 1990, 1988. So I really didn't know anything about dogs. I was an academic. I was teaching in college, and he was fabulous. But he yelled at other dogs on leash. He yelled at dogs with great enthusiasm when I walked around with him in the neighborhood. And nobody was talking about barrier frustration or anything at that time. I mean, this is really a long time ago. Certainly nobody that I knew. And I took him and explained him and showed what he was doing to a number of trainers in the area. And this was in the San Francisco Bay Area, so a reasonably sophisticated, advanced kind of place, where people are up on current trends. And every single trainer who I met told me to kill my dog. And the reason that they told me to kill my dog was that he was dog aggressive. And once that label was attached to him, nobody really wanted to discuss anything in any more depth. Now, in Willie's case, it turned out that he was the best social. He had the most sophisticated social interaction with other dogs than any dog I have ever lived with. He was Prince Charming. He was Sir Galahad. I mean, I later, when I became a dog trainer, I fed him to any number of particularly just nasty females, and he would dance around them, clearly chanting, "Oh, baby, you know you want me," and eventually they all did. He was a mediator, but as it turned out with him, he was incredibly frustrated that he was unable to engage with dogs that we met on our walks, and since the only trainer who I could find who didn't simply tell me to kill my dog was a force trainer, he was also on a prong collar. So not only was he frustrated, every time he started to yell at a dog, he would get a big ouch.
Yeah.
And all of that label that was placed on him, that meant that he was of bad character, that he was harboring hostile intent, I think percolated in my head for all these years and informed much of the work that I've done since. So that's the long answer to how to get about.
Good answer. Someone who's tuned in from the comments said, "I knew Willie." So it sounds like,
who is that?
really, someone who's joining on YouTube, if you want to share your name in the comments, if you feel comfortable, you can do that. But otherwise, we'll just keep you anonymous. But it's interesting to hear, this book, I put up this, I shared this video at the very beginning. So if there were folks who were not here at the very beginning of the, where is it? There it is. At the very beginning of our presentation, this is right straight from the very beginning of the book. And it talks about, this book is about taking away labels that have baggage that are not serving us. And we're going to have a conversation about that today. And I think we might ruffle a couple of feathers, but I'm excited about that because I think that it's important to talk about this. I think that you have basically in the book, you talk about how in the 90s and later, and is still in some circles, dominance is the thing. People are saying, you need to be dominant with your dog. And how much damage did that word dominance and dominance theory, needing to dominate your dog, how much damage did that do, not just to our industry, but also to the dogs in our care for decades? And what you're talking about in this book is saying, I think aggression is doing the same thing. It's not serving us. It's not helping us to really understand what's going on with the animals in our care, with the dogs in our care. I want to share this quote. We put this on our Instagram account and our Facebook account the other day. It really jumped out at me. And it's right on page 1. You put this right on the very first part of the book. Choose the most accurate words to describe your dog's actions and personality, and you will almost automatically make better, kinder, more effective choices about influencing their behavior. Why did you decide to lead the book with that, Janis?
Well, I'm a word person by original training. Okay, so I one of my degrees is in English literature. So word choice is really, really, really important to me. But I understand when people say, what matters is what you do. It's just semantics. It doesn't matter all that much. So I wanted to, lead with the claim that it really does matter, that what we say does influence what we do, and then use the book to show how that's so. And in thinking about writing this book, I was really thinking about how to get that across, which is why the chapter about the history of using the term dominance is in there to begin with. Because I think, at least for people who've been around for quite a while in this area and remember when that was the dominant way to describe relationships between dogs and people, have some understanding of how changing a word can change the way we look at dogs and can change what we do. And that was a huge sea change that I think I'm not sure that the change from meeting dog behavior with force and disapproval, from that to meeting dog behavior with, okay, what's he doing? How can I encourage him to do something else or to do more of that? I'm not sure that change in how people teach and relate to dogs could have happened without making a big dent in the dominance language. So that's why that's there, to show that it really does matter. And we're constantly influenced by the baggage that words can have in how we then perceive the beings that we label with those words.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have seen more of a shift. I went ahead and left a comment. I would love for people to share their thoughts and experiences. I have seen a shift in our industry as dog trainers, as canine professionals, as we shift away from using the word dominance, or we shift away from dominance theory. And I'm curious what other people's experiences of that have been as well, because to your point, words matter. The words that we use matter. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. As we are waiting for our comments to come in, I wanted to share with folks this graphic, this comic that you sent to me.
Oh,
This is an opening story in the book. This is the story of Roxy. Can you tell us a little bit about this, Janis?
yeah, I was looking for a sort of a hypothetical that could show how much difference it might make depending on what goes through your head when you see a particular behavior. And the behavior in all three of the little scenarios was the same. A person is walking by a fence. I had imagined it, I think, as a fence that was more see-through than this. But and then a dog comes running up, barking at that person. And then there are a lot of things that person might think, that they might think based on seeing that dog running up to the fence. Now, most people are going to at the first get a little bit of a squirt of adrenaline when you see that. I sadly don't, because I've had so many dogs yell at me over so many years that I don't even have that response anymore, which is not necessarily a good thing. But if you see that dog, if the thought that goes through your head is, wow, what an aggressive dog, the next thought is likely to be something like, you can't talk to me like that. It's an adversarial response, okay? Meeting something that you're perceiving as anger with anger. And what's that person likely to do? Likely to stand there and try and stare down the dog, for example, or yell at the dog. And all of us who've worked with this kind of behavior know that that's not likely to be terribly productive, okay? Another person might come along and think, oh, gosh, that dog seems upset and excited, and I better get out of here. But that person is then frightened and is likely to hurry away. They're going to have that's a less escalating response than the first one. But if you take the aggression off the table and the person simply thinks, wow, this dog is really upset, okay, my being here is really upsetting this dog, that person is likely to do something as mundane as simply turn their back and cross the street. Now, this is in no way to say that any one of those three responses is going to get an entirely predictable response. That's going to depend on a whole lot of things in terms of how upset the dog is, whether the dog is upset at all. Okay, if the two dogs that I live with now run up to the door and bark at people, there's no upset in it at all. It's just, I want to see you, I want to see you, I want to see you, I want to see you. So, and we don't know that from the scenario of the barking dog. But we do know as professionals that some of those, one of those responses is more likely to de-escalate the situation than others. Professionally, we can say that with some confidence, not 100%, but more likely. And that de-escalating response is more likely to be the response without that label of, oh, what an aggressive dog this is. Because that immediately puts us in an adversarial situation with the dog where we are projecting a hostility on the part of the dog that we do not know exists.
Yes. And I think that is, again, when you're talking about the words that we use, the labels that we use matter, not just to the experience of the dog, but to our experience for sure. Yeah. And how we're going to respond to that dog with compassion, understanding, what our human behavior is, but also our mental behavior. How are we thinking about this dog? So we're going to do a little experiment. I'm going to show a video clip, and I want people to tell me in the comments, what do they think? They see this dog behind a fence, and what do they think? What's their reaction? What's your response when you see this? Let's say you're walking through your neighborhood and you see this large mixed breed dog barking, or as Janis likes to say, yelling. Or would you even classify this as barking or yelling behind the fence? So if you can leave us a comment and let us know what you think. You see this dog, what's your first reaction? And or what do you do? How do you respond in that situation? When I was reading the story of Roxy in the book, I had just recently been visiting family and walking through an unfamiliar neighborhood with my dog. And there was a dog that charged the fence and bark, 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 yelling and yelling and yelling. And I walked past this dog several times in the course of a few days and was thinking so much. I had such a visual appearance of like, oh, Roxy, when I was reading the story, because I remember that just having had that experience, and I didn't have a lot of options to move away. It was kind of just get past this dog as fast as we can so that we're not causing more distress. But it was interesting. I definitely had a visual of what Roxy looked like in my head. She's a red Australian Shepherd because of that dog that was in the neighborhood. Mallory says, I think the dog looks scared and alerting to a threat. I would stay away from this dog. We've got another comment from, this is Denise, by the way, Janis, who knew Willie. And Denise says, no idea of intent or trigger from this brief cross section. Yeah, we don't have enough information based on just this 10 seconds of this dog. And we don't have the context for sure. Lori says, doesn't seem frenzied. So just commenting that a stranger is near. I just keep calmly walking. Oh, Lori, I love that you said the dog is commenting instead of yelling. That is fantastic. So I've got one more video clip. This one is of two small dogs that are barking behind a fence. So same question. You see these two dogs, and how do you feel? What do you think? Does their size or breed make a difference to you? Does it make a difference to your response, to your reaction, if you see these two small dogs that are barking behind a fence? And if you're leaving us a comment, let us know if you're commenting about the big dog or the two little dogs. Looks like Ben commenting about the big dog says he's interested in something intensely. Is he stressed or excited? Not sure I can see enough of his body to say for sure, but he's focused on something. Lori said, I had a Sheltie that did that. We've got another comment. Dog seems alert. I would change my path so he can calm down. That's fantastic. Again, giving that compassion. Kelly commented, not crazy barking, more alert, tail up, wagging, no teeth. And Lori, Roseanne said, agrees with Lori. Lori said, same. Oh, same. They're just perkier. These little dogs. Definitely perky. Mallory says, those two little guys don't seem like a threat. They also look like they're alerting to a threat or excited that their person is home. Denise said, definitely small dogs are killers with silly face. Kelly says, looks like the little dogs are saying, come play, come see me. And that kind of brings us to a point that you made in the book about barrier frustration. So I really liked when you talked about we're not using the label of aggression. So if we can replace that word, I would love to know, Janis, do you feel comfortable telling everyone what the thesis of your book, if we could replace the word aggression, what word would you use?
My first choice would be defensiveness. So you know that what dog not this doesn't cover all the barking territory because barking is such a wide-ranging communication for dogs that it doesn't necessarily communicate any upset of any kind. You know, it's not. It can be a happy thing, mm-hmm. but in terms of signals that we can recognize as you know, communicating discomfort, I would say that I can't find any, and I can't even hypothesize any that don't fit within the general category of defending oneself against some kind of real or perceived threat. And from the dog's perspective, it doesn't matter whether the threat is real any more than it does for us. It's just, you know, it's a perceived threat, a danger of some kind. Absolutely. And I can't find anything in the aggression literature that doesn't fall under that category. with the exception of predation, which is a completely different topic.
Yes.
And not what we're talking about here.
Yes, I did reroute you because we were going to talk about frustration and barrier guarding or barrier.
Sorry.
I rerouted you, and I said the wrong thing. Said something I wasn't meaning to. But when you were talking about the assessment of a threat, very similar to something that Mallory said, that the dogs look like they're alerting to a threat or excited that their person is home. But to Mallory, these dogs don't seem like a threat. And that's a good assessment on her part, given the information, again, these little 10-second clips with no context. But we shared this quote on our social media this week. I'd love to know if anyone saw it. Leave us a comment and let us know if you saw this. We want to know where we're reaching people and what is speaking to people. But I shared an excerpt from the book, and it was several sentences, but this was the last part of the sentence, or the last part of the paragraph in this quote, that helping dogs to recalibrate their threat assessment meter is the business of compassionate behavior modification for dogs whose defensiveness is compromising their quality of life. And I will say, in the book, you attributed part of this to Dr. Amy Cook, and we tagged her in this post so that she would get some credit for that, because I really like this idea of compassionate behavior modification. And also, the earlier part of this quote was talking about how both dogs and toddlers sometimes use their teeth to say, hey, stop that, and the communication. But the idea, I want to talk a little bit about this, like the threat assessment of, one label that I have seen and heard a lot in the dog training industry, and it sounds like this was not the case when Willie was first coming home with you, is leash reactivity. And I recently heard a trainer say, reactivity is just being alive. You should be reacting to your environment. Overreactivity is a different label. That's something a little bit different. But can you talk a little bit about this recalibrating the threat assessment for dogs who are displaying not aggressive, defensive behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I really have to give credit to Amy Cook for this. This is the first time that I heard it framed this way. Was at that same conference that I talked about at the beginning, where she was talking about this wonderful technique that she uses with dogs who overperceive threats, and this idea of recalibrating their threat meter or their fear meter. And it struck me that this is something that we're much more likely to be able to do if we're taking an empathetic view of the dog as responding to a threat. Then the appropriate thing to do is to do what we can to help the dog understand that whatever it is that the dog is finding threatening is in fact not dangerous, is not going to hurt them, and therefore they can adjust that meter so they don't respond by trying to drive away whatever that stimulus was, whether it's a trash can on the street or a new person coming into their house. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the perceived threat is. Framing it in that way, framing it as a threat meter that needs recalibration is an enormous step forward in empathy. And if you ask me what the most important thing is in educating people, whether they're professionals or pet owners, about dog behavior, I will always tell you anything that builds legitimate empathy. And that's what that kind of framing does. Not character assessment, much less character assassination, is not going to get us anywhere in terms of living more comfortably on both sides with dogs.
Absolutely. I want to take us back to what we were talking about with frustration and dogs that are experiencing frustration, barrier frustration in general. In the book, you say frustration is about thwarted impulses. It happens when something we need very badly appears in the environment, appearing attainable, and yet we're prevented from accessing it. And that is something that I can relate to. I have felt that frustration. And for those who aren't familiar with what barrier frustration is, can you maybe give it a little bit of a definition and explain it? And then I want to talk about something that you say about frustration in the book.
Yeah, so what we commonly talk about, frame as barrier frustration when we're talking about dogs yelling at other dogs on the leash are simply a dog who's in a state of hypermotivation to interact socially with another dog and is prevented from doing that. And social interaction is widely demonstrated to be enormously important to dog welfare. So it's not a small thing when a dog is prevented from deeply motivated social interaction. And when that happens over and over again, which it does to many dogs, living in pet dogs in an environment where they encounter lots of other dogs on leash, happens over and over again, then that frustration builds up and it gets expressed. And it may very well get expressed as yelling, and the mechanism there is likely to be anticipation of that frustration. The dog has learned that in this situation, walking down the street on a leash, if he sees another dog, he's not going to get to say hello. And so it's no longer good news to him to see another dog. It's no longer yippee, I get to say hello. It's, oh, just go away. This is going to be awful. And in the reality of a dog, being on a leash, not even necessarily, with a collar that's painful, it can also be accompanied by being, tugged and pulled by the person on the other end of the leash, trying to prevent an encounter that person fears may be unsafe. So I mean, dogs and pretty much everybody else tends to push back against physical resistance. So you've got that added into the mix of the frustration of being prevented from eating the other dog. And I think anybody who has worked with dogs who have gotten to this point has seen dogs where the agitation can get so strong that it can spill over into actual confrontational behavior with other dogs, just because the dog has been repeatedly so ramped up. So you take hypersocialization and you turn it into not wanting to see dogs, anticipating something bad happening when you see dogs. And it's really tough on dogs. The other thing that's very difficult though about that particular scenario is because not every dog who yells at other dogs is suffering from barrier frustration. An awful lot of them are, but there are some who really don't like other dogs. And you can't just look at that behavior and tell the difference.
Yes.
You'd have to find, all kinds of ways to determine, and they're all doable, to determine what you're actually working with. If you're working with one of those dogs who, whatever their experiences, have taught them just generally that other dogs are bad news.
Well, and hearing you talk about the social component that is sometimes understated or undervalued by handlers or by guardians, this idea of the social component between dogs, but also something you touch on in the book that you didn't mention is the social component of wanting to see another human. You tell a story in the book about this dog that was just yelling and yelling and yelling and yelling at you. And then one day the gate was open and you went right past and the dog was like, oh, hi, so not even just social interaction with another dog, but another person. I know that about my own dog, that he is going to yell when someone comes in the door. And you talk about that also in the book of you would ask as a behavior consultant, what is your dog going to do when I knock on the door? And what is your dog going to do when I enter your house? And I think we should all add those to our intake questionnaires, because I certainly will be doing that, not just for safety, but just for what's the owner's perception of their dog's behavior as well. That gives you a ton of information. But thinking about that social need to interact and the risk of you don't know if that dog is saying go away to the dog or human, or, and this is what I wanted to say, I loved this quote in the book. It is in chapter 3. You're talking about frustration, and you said the threat in this case is knowing that frustration is coming and attempting to drive it away. And I just had this moment of like, oh, the threat is the like bad internal feeling that they could be barking, they could be yelling because they don't like the anticipation of feeling frustrated. And I also, as a human, don't like feeling frustrated, and I would behave defensively if I wanted to avoid feeling frustrated. So that was just such an interesting moment to me to read about that concept of trying to make the frustration go away or trying to make the dog or the trigger or the human go away.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all experienced situations where we know we're going to be tantalized by something that we really want that we're not going to be able to get, which is really the scenario for frustration, and we can get agitated in anticipation of that and try and avoid it. It's just the same with dogs, and there aren't that many things that are more highly motivating for domestic dogs than social interaction.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge component of their general quality of life. Yeah. The dog that you mentioned from the book again was just she was a big girl with a deep voice. Boy, I mean, she was really intimidating. And this was probably in the 80s. I mean, again, back in the days before I knew anything, and she would yell at me like mad every time I would walk along this chain link fence that I had to walk by to get to my front door. And she would run back and forth along this fence with this huge, deep baritone voice, yelling and yelling and yelling at me, until one day I found myself almost at my front step, and just going up my front step, and realized the gate in the fence that she was behind was open. And this was very disconcerting for me. I couldn't think of anything to do. I couldn't dash into my house fast enough. So I just stood there and didn't do anything. She got to the open gate, stopped barking, walked up to me, sniffed around my hands, nudged my hand a little bit, stood there for a while, and went back behind her fence. And I mean, she certainly could have been, she could have been a dog who saw me as, a great threat and intrusion on her area, on her safe space, and felt like she needed to do something about that, but she didn't. And after that, every time I walked up and down the fence, I would throw her a little goodie, and she stopped barking at me.
You were a dog trainer long before you knew you were a dog trainer. We have a question from one of our viewers. Lori wants to know, can you also talk about fence fighting as it relates to barrier frustration?
Ooh, that's a very cool question. The answer is, I have to preface this with the answer is I don't know, and nobody does, because it's not really a studied phenomenon. My own experience seems to have demonstrated to me that there are some dogs for whom this is just kind of fun, and when the barrier isn't there, the whole thing evaporates. That they do it, that it isn't about agitation, with the other dog. It could be barrier frustration. But I really don't know, and nobody does. What I can tell you is that it is not a slam dunk for hostility toward other dogs, because that definitely doesn't materialize.
Yeah, and like you said, there's ways to test and there's ways to figure
Yeah.
out what the dog is actually saying. But like you said,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell on the front end. Nicole, I'm so glad you've asked this question because this is where I was headed next. Nicole says, you go into genetics research in the book. What does science actually say about a breed and how a dog warns you? I'm going to table that question really quick because we have an audience participation quiz for you all. So this graphic appears in the books. It also appeared on our social media. So if you know the answer, it's okay. You can just go ahead and guess. But we want you to comment, let us know what percentage of American Pit Bull Terrier is this black and white dog? Do you think it's 10%, 40%, 60%, 0%? Do you have a guess on what you think this dog is just based on this picture? We are looking at a dog on site. You see this dog. What percentage of American Pit Bull Terrier do you think this dog is? We want to hear in the comments. You also can guess a different number if A, B, C, or D is not your first guess. And once you have, Roseanne, you can't give us the answer like that right away. Once you have guessed, we also want to know what percentage do you think this dog, this brown and white dog, what percentage of American Pit Bull Terrier is this dog? 12%, 36%, 58%, none, a totally different one. Kelly is guessing 40%. Ben is also guessing 40% on the first dog. I gave some different numbers so that hopefully when people commented, I could get a better idea. I would like to know if it surprises anyone watching to learn that the black and white dog had almost 60% American Pit Bull Terrier, and the brown and white dog had 58% American Pit Bull Terrier. So the comment that we got from Roseanne, no way to know from looks, is correct. And further, I have one more question for you all who are tuning in. There's another question. This is a trick question for you all. If you take a look at these two dogs, these puppies were the offspring of two purebred breeds. Put in the comments what breed you think the parents were. So any two breeds you want to guess. And I'm going to leave that up for a minute so that people can guess what the dogs are before I reveal the answer. If you have the book or you've read the book, the answer is in the book. And hilariously, this came from a study that was done in the 1960s. Is that right, Janis? Do you remember?
That is correct.
So
we've known this for a really long time. And this one should be easy because these pups are what are genetically called F1s. In other words, there are only two breeds in their ancestry. Mom was one and dad was another. Ought to be easy.
Super easy. So drop your comments and let us know what these two dogs are. I think, when I was looking at this picture, I had to do a double take. And then I really had to look at, I love the way that you encouraged in the publication of this book for us to put the citations and the notes, which I know that you said you liked how Alexandra Horowitz did that with her book. But I was finding myself constantly flipping back and forth with the citations in the back, because I like that you're not just doing a citation, you're also actually putting some notes and thoughts. And so being able to read the notes that you put in here about this study, and I'm like, wow, this study happened in 1960, Scott and Fuller's 1960 study of dog development and breed characteristics. Let's see, what are the guesses? We've got a hound mix, Cocker Spaniel, and GSHP. What is a German Short-Haired Pointer? Good question. Good guess. All right. I'm going to wait just another second to see if we have any other guesses come in of what we think the purebred parents of these dogs are. And then I want you, Janis, to think about your question that we had earlier from Nicole to talk about what does breed actually say about what a dog warns you. We've got to guess that it maybe is a beagle. Oh, these are some really good guesses. I like these guesses. All right, I'm going to reveal the answer. Beagle with a hunter breed. Okay, that's a good guess. All right, are you all ready for the answer? It was a Basenji and a Cocker Spaniel. So Cricket, you actually were close with the Cocker Spaniel, but that surprised me because obviously these dogs, these puppies look nothing like their parents. So Janis, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about this and talk about genetics.
Yeah, and we've got a really robust literature now. We've got a lot of studies showing that even people who are in dogs and know quite a lot about it don't do very well in trying to guess the breed ancestry of mixed breed dogs. And this is not due to lack of expertise. The guesses are usually quite plausible, according to what the dogs actually look like. But when you throw all those genes together into a pot, there's just, even with only 2 breeds, and it's very unlikely that most of the dogs in the United States who are mixed breeds are only 2 breeds. It's just too complicated. You can come up with almost anything. You just can't look at a dog with more than 1 breed in its ancestry, or no breeds at all. There are such dogs. There are certainly such dogs, and make a reliable guess as to what breeds are in that dog's industry. We just can't do it. We're wrong more than we're right, unless there's a really small percentage of all but 1 breed. Then sometimes we get a little bit better. And in the United States, that's particularly important because all of our best estimates show that more than half of the dogs in this country are mutts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, more of them are mutts than are pedigree dogs. There are other places in the world where that's not true, where there are more pedigree dogs. And we do a bit better, those of us who know something about dog breeds, at looking at a dog who is pedigreed and guessing that breed. We do quite a lot better, which completely makes sense because most of the selection that's done with pedigreed dogs is done in the pursuit of a certain appearance. That's what's being focused on.
Yeah, and you talked about that in your book with the story about the Greyhound, that Greyhounds are one of the breeds that really was, and I know Border Collies are the same way, that they were really bred for function longer than some breeds that were bred more for looks. And even then you can have outliers when it comes to behavior of what they were bred for.
Yeah, with Greyhounds, they actually come out looking much alike. Not AKC Greyhounds, but Greyhounds bred for racing. They come out looking somewhat alike, but that's simply because they're being ruthlessly selected for the ones who can run the fastest. And if you take a dog and breed only the ones that are fastest, sooner or later they're going to look pretty much like Greyhounds. Okay, because that's the physicality that is most capable of doing that. What you don't get, even with this very, very ruthless selection for only a couple of traits, which does not occur on a large scale anywhere in the world with very many breeds of dogs. It just isn't done. But racing greyhounds are selected entirely for 2 traits: for the ability to run really, really fast, and a keen impulse to chase little running, retreating things. They got to be super keen for that. And if they don't, any individual who does not have those 2, remember, just 2 characteristics, does not reproduce. you would expect that something that to be nudging 100% of the dogs in that gene pool that would carry both of those characteristics, and they can't even get close. They can't get close. They're a good 25%, and this is according to the racing industry estimates, a good 25% wash out because they're just not that keen to chase. I bet of the four that I've lived with, the three that I lived with long term, aside from a lot of fosters, two of them, if a bunny hopped by them 10 feet in front of them, they just kind of look around and say, "Oh yeah, whatever," and go back to what they're doing. Okay, it was very clear why they never made it to the racetrack, because they just weren't into it. It's very, very difficult to breed, to create a gene pool that is even close to consistent for even a single behavioral trait, much less a big global personality trait like friendly to people. Okay, that's much more challenging. They can't even get one piece of the predation sequence solid. Even if every individual has as an absolute barrier to reproducing not having that characteristic. So it's no wonder that the most important, most kind of hang your hat on gold standard study that has ever been done so far on pet dogs and behavior, which was done at the Broad Institute, came out in 2023. Came out 3 years ago. Came with finished with the very unambiguous conclusion that breed simply is not a useful predictor of behavior in an individual dog. It just isn't. It was a huge study with much more reliable samples and methodology than anything that had been done before, and that's what they came up with on breed. So until somebody does something better, and I don't see that happening anytime soon, it was a very massive endeavor to do that, to do that study at Broad. We really have to kind of hang our hats on that and say, you know what, I can't look at a dog, I can't look at his pedigree and say this is what kind of personality you're going to have. We just can't do it.
Fantastic answer to Nicole's question. I can't wait to hear what you think of that, Nicole, and what people who are tuning in think of that very wonderful and thorough answer. Thank you, Janis. I want to ask those in the comments, how many of you work in animal shelters, animal rescue, animal welfare industries? Because we're going to start talking about the difference between saying shelter dogs and dogs living in shelters. And I want to know what percentage of our audience, or how many people are tuning in who work with rescue dogs or who foster, things like that. And this relates to Nicole's question about how do we predict behavior? What are the breeds telling us? And as I think it was it was Roseanne who said that you just can't tell by looking. You can't tell what a dog's breed is just by looking at them. We know that. You have a lot of information about that in one of the chapters of these books about how, I think actually you have an actual number I could find about, it's basically maybe like a quarter of the time we're close to right just by identifying based on looks what a breed of a dog might be. And like you said, definitely probably more than one or two dog breeds in there if you're coming from mixed breeds. Ben commented and said, I once read the minute two or more genetics are mixed, two or more breed genetics are mixed, it's a mutt. And absolutely. That is very common, right? We've got a lot of, like you said, I think in this country, more than half are mixed breeds, Janis? Yeah. We've got some people who are dog trainers, work at a rescue, volunteer at an animal shelter. Fantastic. So this is the heading to one of the chapters in the books. Why say dogs living in shelters instead of shelter dogs? And the answer is because the science says so. Without giving away too much in the book, Janis, I want you to talk about this a little bit. This made me think of a human rights issue that we talk about, people who are unhoused as opposed to calling them homeless people. And obviously the whole point of your book is that language really matters. So why does it matter to say dogs living in shelters instead of shelter dogs?
I think because shelter dogs isn't necessarily inaccurate, but it's developed a connotation that it can suggest to people that there's something different about those dogs and that they are somehow damaged goods. Dr. Amy Martyr said something about this one time that it still gives me goosebumps, and I'll probably misquote it, but she said she realized at some point that the dogs that she worked with in shelters and saw in shelters were no different from the dogs the dogs that she worked with and saw, with clients or out in the street or with her friends. But the dogs living in shelters, the dogs in the shelters just had no person to stand up beside them. And it still gives me chills to, that thing that she said. And everything that Dr. Gary Petronic and I were able to find in the literature really supported the idea that there's nothing different about the population of dogs who happen to find themselves between homes and living in shelters at any given time. There's no difference between that group of dogs and the group of dogs who are living in homes. Their circumstances are just different. And some of them like people and some of them don't like people. And some of them like to play fetch and some of them don't like to play fetch, and so on and so forth. It's not to say that all dogs living in shelters are nice dogs, but not all dogs living in homes are, lovable and friendly dogs either. It just isn't, there just isn't any evidence that it's any different. They're just dogs who are between homes living in shelters.
I bookmarked a few passages from the chapter where you're talking about this in chapter 6. And one of the things is basically what you just said. We could find no evidence that dogs who find themselves living in shelters are any different behaviorally than a sample of dogs living in homes with people. And then on the next page, you say 100% even if 100% of dogs being surrendered are reported by their guardians to have pulled on the leash, it's not a risk factor if 100% of the dogs still living in their homes do the same thing. So you're talking about what makes it a risk is that it's different than a dog that has a home or a dog that doesn't have a home. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And that's just it's a technical understanding of what risk means. It has to be a correlation between one characteristic like pulling on leash being elevated, corresponding with those dogs being more likely to find themselves in shelters. So you can't just look at the behavior and determine whether it's a risk factor. You have to compare the dogs living in shelters with the dogs successfully living in homes. And what we found was when we looked at surveys of what people reported in the behavior of the dogs who lived with them, who were by definition, had not been surrendered, we're not living in shelters, that they rarely said that they thought their dogs were perfect. They rarely said that there wasn't, anything that they would change about their dog's behavior. And they also rarely said that they were dissatisfied with their relationship. So I mean, I think that most people don't expect perfection in a relationship with a dog any more than they expect perfection in a relationship with their friends and family. We wouldn't have any friends and family if we expected that. Pretty much.
Right.
And I think most people love their dogs, and take the quirks with the happy stuff. So there just isn't any evidence that it's the quirks that send the dogs to be between homes and in a shelter. Much more evidence that practical, heartbreaking practical situations drive people to have to end relationships with dogs.
Yes. Kelly is asking what the study size was for this. And Kelly, I will say it's pretty detailed in chapter 6, but do you happen to know off the top of your head, Janis?
This was a survey of a whole collection of studies. So right. They ranged from thousands of dogs to hundreds of dogs.
Yeah.
So there were 14 studies, I think, total that we looked at in the on the what kinds of behaviors do people report in their own pet dogs, and there was a wide range of the numbers of dogs in those studies.
Thanks, Kelly, for checking on that. I did like you mentioned that researchers have been asking people why they surrender their dogs to shelters in various ways and at various locations for decades. The scrutiny began in the 1970s when the issue of euthanasia rates in shelters first drew the attention of the veterinary community and then of various groups whose mission was animal welfare. So thinking about how long we've been I think something that's interesting to me is how much the sheltering world has changed in the last even 20 years, even in the last 10 years. And the populations that we see in shelters around the country has changed a lot. And I happen to know that it's very different geographically, depending on where you live in this country, at least. You're not going to see the same dogs in New Orleans that you are in Richmond, Virginia, or in Memphis, Tennessee, or in San Diego, California. You're going to see a different population of dogs based on where you live and what the demographics of the people living in that area are. But I think that thinking about how we have been collecting this data of why are you surrendering your animal, and there's lots of reasons, but really challenging that idea of dogs in homes also have these behaviors. We're also seeing these behaviors in homes. So does that mean that that's why these dogs are being surrendered? Maybe, but does that mean that it's a risk to put dogs that are behaving in one home in another home? And this is a question, I didn't have time to really form this question exactly the way that I wanted to, but I'm just going to read a little clip and then maybe you can tell me a little bit about it. You say, first of all, you say the papers we wrote had been published in a well-respected journal and had generally been well-received. There's a lot more about these projects in chapter 8. So I'm reading in chapter 6, but just in case people are like, this is not a complete answer. But this part jumped out at me. But many people in rehoming were still clinging to these tests, behavior assessment tests, or protesting that they had to do something and anxiously inquiring as to what do we do instead. It finally dawned on us, and this may seem obvious to you as you've been reading the book, particularly if you don't live in the dog rehoming world, that people were talking with in sheltering and rescue organizations seems to be working from an assumption that there was something different and possibly dangerous about the population of dogs they were trying to help. These folks were worried that they had a duty to prevent what they termed as aggressive dogs from being adopted out into the public. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you go on to say, there must be such a belief, we reasoned, particularly in light of the fact that no other way of bringing a dog into one's household requires any sort of good housekeeping safety seal of approval. Breeders don't feel the need to do this before they sell puppies or when they place non-show quality adult dogs. And your neighbor down the street who is moving and can't take their dog doesn't do an assessment like this before they ask you if you would like to take Fido into your home. So what is this idea that in shelters we have to guarantee or try and prevent, or even, I would argue, we have a responsibility in animal welfare and rehoming to make sure that we're not releasing a dangerous dog out into the community? What do we do? What is the answer, Janis?
Okay, I mean, this was the penny that finally dropped. Dr. Gary Petronic and I had been, this was in the third of a series of papers that we had written about the unreliability of behavior evaluations that are often used with dogs in shelters. And there's really almost no argument on the part of anybody anymore that these battery tests are either validated or reliable. Okay, it's kind of a settled question. And even if they were, this was the first hypothetical paper that we did, they couldn't, they statistically, because the incidence of the things that of the behaviors that were being targeted is so low in any general population, it's statistically impossible to get more than a 50-50 chance of it being right. So why were people still insisting on doing this? And the best hypothesis that we could come up with, or at least one of the best hypotheses we could come up with, was that there's an assumption that somehow dogs who are between homes living in shelters require some special scrutiny beyond that they're somehow more dangerous and require more scrutiny than animals, than dogs who people acquire in any other way. And most dogs are acquired in other ways. They're acquired from breeders or from your next door neighbor, or all different kinds of ways. Even as strays, there are all kinds of ways that people adopt dogs, none of which carry this kind of scrutiny. So our intent in that last paper was really to try and show that special scrutiny beyond simply reasonable, observation of how the dog acts in as close to real life as you can get for a dog living in a shelter, are as much as you need. But also the admission, the acknowledgement, and I think this may be the most difficult part for people to deal with, the acknowledgement that in any population of dogs, there are, if it's large enough, it has to be quite large to be able to say this. In any large population of dogs, there are going to be some who hurt people. A very, very, very few. But you're going to be right. You're going to be right much more often than you're wrong if you just randomly look at a group of dogs and say you're going to be okay. Most of the time you're going to be right. We may not be able to do that much better than that in sheltering than in any place else. Than any place else. I don't think there's ever going to be a gold standard test that's going to predict the likelihood of behavior, of biting behavior, and certainly not warning behavior, which most dogs do at some point on the part of dogs. I don't think it can be done. But you can take, reasonable care if for example, that a dog has bitten and injured, repeatedly before. That's a completely different situation. That's something that happened in the real world. And if that dog is in that situation again, that behavior is likely to recur unless there's some major intervention. But I think we're looking for a guarantee that never exists with behavior.
Mm.
It just doesn't exist. They've tried to do it with human beings, and thrown massive amounts of research and money at trying to predict, say, recidivist behavior in human beings, and the results have been very, very poor, to the extent that it's mostly being abandoned in the criminal justice situation, where there are much more resources than could possibly ever be directed at trying to predict the behavior of an individual dog. Mm. I don't think we're going to get there, which by no means means that we shouldn't be paying attention to how dogs act when they're in our care. Of course we should. But But to take them into a room and subject them to a series of things that are meant to provoke them, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It would be great if it did, but it doesn't.
Yeah. I have a question from one of our viewers. Kelly wants to know, what about brain changes for dogs in shelters long-term, shutting down and then coming out into the world, in referring to defensiveness?
Are you talking about, like the kind of brain change that you can measure with an fMRI? I'm going to make sure I'm answering the question.
Good.
Do you mean behavior? Are we talking about behavioral changes?
Kelly, we need some clarification on your question.
Yeah.
Let us know what you mean about brain changes. I wonder if Kelly is talking about, we know that there's some research when we're talking about stress in dogs and cortisol levels and like cortisol. I don't know that this is Kelly's question, but cortisol levels we know spike in the shelter. We know that after a traumatizing event of any kind or a crisis event, that cortisol could stay in the system for 72 hours afterwards. So thinking about even a dog going into a shelter and being able to be in the shelter and then come out of a shelter, they're still going to take some time to come off of that. Kelly says, yes, behavior changes, stress. That's what he's talking about. Shutting down and then maybe coming out into the world and showing more defensiveness, which I think touches on something you were about to say, Janis, about warning signals versus actually making contact or anything like that.
It's too bad Lisa Gunther isn't here. She's the authority on this. I mean, but simply having worked in a shelter, anyone who's worked in a shelter is going to understand that many dogs behave quite differently living in a shelter environment than they do living in a home. There's been Lisa Gunther again has done some really interesting research on the effect of cortisol levels and behavior of simply fostering dogs. How dogs will go out on a short-term foster and come back and be more relaxed. Their behavior has changed and their cortisol levels have gone down. So environment clearly affects stress levels, and those stress levels affect behavior. And in some individuals, the elevated stress results in shutdown behavior, and in other individuals, elevated cortisol and stress, stimulates behavior. Results in more acting out, and there's no way to predict that except to see how a particular dog responds. And this is one of the probably one of the difficulties insofar as it's been studied, the relationship between how a dog acts in a shelter and performs on a behavior evaluation and how they act when they're at home. And the predictive value has been, insofar as it's been studied, which is very limited, has been shown to be really poor. And that's probably a function of the environment being so different that you can't really tell what a dog is going to do necessarily based on how he responds to even the same kind of stimuli in a shelter. But I lost the thread of some of the gist of your question there.
There's a follow-up question. Will that alter neurotransmitter routes long term, and can it be reversed? And it sounds like, Kelly, we might need to put you in touch with Lisa Gunther.
I don't know if Lisa even knows the answer to that. I don't know of any studies that have tried to measure that have tried to measure long-term differences in any sort of differences in brain chemistry between tracking an individual dog living in a shelter with that dog after a period of time living in a home. So I don't know. It may have been done, but if it has been done, it's not come to my attention.
We'll keep our eye out, Kelly. Good questions. This is how future research studies get started.
Yeah.
I want to harken back to a comment that was left a little while ago by Mary, who said, I regularly volunteer in rescue, fostering, transporting, etc. We joke that all the dogs are lab mixes. And I'm bringing that up because in the book, you say when we're talking about in shelters where we're thinking about labeling a dog with a breed based just on how they look. Something that you say in the book is we must develop our repertoire of ways to describe dogs without resorting to making up breed labels for them. Doing this is the only way to be honest with people, and it's the only way to avoid justified blame and even liability down the road. Our mantra must be, we don't know, it doesn't matter, and here's why that's good news. So can you tell us a little bit more, Janis, about why it's good news that we don't know and it doesn't matter what breed the dog we're looking at might be?
The greatest service that we can do, I think, with people who are considering adopting a dog is to do everything we can to steer them to look at the dog in front of them, to see the individuality of that particular dog as he or she is standing right there in front of them, what they do, how they interact, how the person, feels and warms up to the dog. I think we're doing people a disservice when we attach a breed label, whether the connotation of that breed for that person is positive or negative. I think you can do almost as much damage by labeling a dog with a breed label that they immediately think, oh, this is a nice, perfect, lovely, friendly dog. You can be setting them up for failure and denial of when they deal with what the dog actually does, because you're setting up false expectations based on stereotypes. Either way, much better to talk about what you know about the dog and helping narrate the interaction that the person has with the dog. This is why I love to hear people's answers to the question of what kind of dog do you have, or what kind of dog is that? Okay. Mm-hmm. So and it's a fun parlor game to figure out how to answer that question of who is this dog without mentioning breed. Then you're left with things that are real. You're left with things that are real, like how big is he? What color is he? What kind of coat does he have? What does he like to do? What does he not like to do? What's he likely to warm up to right away? What's he likely to avoid? You're forced into a situation where you have to talk about that actual dog. Mm. And that's the best thing that you can do for everybody.
I think also in my experience, a lot of people get or want to get a dog that is the same breed as a dog they've had before, because we believe that that's a predictor of another good experience. Like, we've had a childhood dog of a certain breed, or we had a breed before, we've had good experiences with that breed. And so you want to have that experience again. So you want to have that breed again. But as you're saying, there's that's not a predictor. That's not a predictor of behavior or personality or anything else. Every dog is an individual.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody, and it's not difficult. I find it much more difficult to communicate that to people in dogs than to sort of the regular pet owning public. Because if you use an analogy like, do you have siblings, or do you have more than one child? Are they exactly the same, in how they act? No, they're not. They're often not the same at all. And dogs of a given breed are not nearly as closely related as human siblings. So you can divest people of those expectations. Now, if a person just kind of warms up to a dog of a certain physical description, of a certain look, more than others, there's no crime in that. That's perfectly fine. I mean, that's often how we choose our partners and our mates, isn't it? I mean, we first warm up to people other people according to looks often. That's not a crime, as long as I mean, if it helps fill that emotional niche for you that you're looking for in the relationship, then go for it. Just don't burden it with behavioral expectations, because you're likely to be disappointed or surprised.
Yeah.
You know, do what, go crazy with the nostalgia about your childhood dog. That's perfectly fine, as long as you don't expect that to be the same dog as this one who looks the same. It's
Yeah.
It's not wrong. You just need to be realistic.
I'm going to push us a little bit. Kelly, can you offer some clarification on what you meant here? You said in a comment, agree to disagree just a little bit when referring to training, but I hear you. And since this seems like a respectful comment, you're not trying to start a fight or be aggressive. Maybe you're feeling a little defensive. Maybe that's the word we need to use. Could you tell us what you mean? Is this in your comment, are you talking about agree to disagree about training certain breeds, or I don't actually remember if there was something that Janis said. So if you would like to continue that conversation, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you were going to say. But as we're waiting, Janis, I've got one more story I want you to tell us about.
Well, I'm going to address what you just said.
Oh, okay. Well, do you know what she might have meant? Did you say something about?
She might have meant, I don't know if she's familiar with the Broad study. There were a couple of their behavioral factors where they did see some not dramatic, but some difference in the reported behaviors by breed. One of those was what they called in the study biddability, which roughly translated to how easy the dog was to train. Now there are lots and lots of caveats on that, that are going to have to do with human breed-based expectation on how easy it was going to be, and therefore, you have confirmation bias coming into it, and what you mean by training, and what you mean by easy, and whether you have a certain breed, and that you have expectations of, and therefore you're gonna try like mad to train it, and other breeds where your expectation is, oh, you can't train them, so you don't try. All those caveats in order, they did find some difference in the trait that they called biddability, which was how easy the dogs were to train. So there is not zero evidence for that.
That is great. I did find, and I want to put this in here, I did find the reference, and I want to make sure I can direct people to that. Kelly said she's not feeling defensive. Thanks for sharing. Mean more for speaking with client education. So that is some good context as well. I wanted to direct you all that in chapter 5, so the citation is going to be, if you've got the book or if you're rewatching this later and have the book in front of you, it's 5.12. The quote that is noted is, it debunks the myth that breed is a reliable predictor of dogs' behavior. This and other accessible summaries of the Broad Institute work can be found at Darwin's Ark. So if you want to look up a little bit more about that, people who are reading, that's where I would direct you. Janis, as we're wrapping up, I would like you to tell us one more story. And it is the story about the dog incident that you had, where your beloved dog would not go back in the house one night and showing some aggressive behavior. But tell us that story, would you? I really appreciated it when you were talking about the story in the book.
He's actually sleeping right beside me now.
Oh, fantastic. He can make a cameo.
Apparently dreaming, because he's making those little guinea pig sounds, that dogs make when they dream sometimes. Yeah, that was my little dog Ricky. Who I was not feeling well, and I'd let him out. I had let him out to potty in the backyard, and I was having a kind of a meltdown day, and I couldn't get him to come back in the house. His recall is actually quite decent, and not as good as it could be, but decent. But I couldn't get him back in the house, and I finally resorted to trying to just kind of get behind him and herd him back into the house. At which point, he'd been evading me in the yard, and at which point he turned at me and growled a little bit. and growled a little bit and lifted his lip. And the thought went through my head. I was in the midst of writing this book at the time. The thought went through my head, is Ricky becoming aggressive? So we all have lapses, I think, particularly when we're trying to change the way that we frame things. And it took me a while to reconstruct what had happened. What had happened right before he went outside was that a friend who was visiting me was cooking something, was frying something in a pan on my stove, making that funny bubbling sound that frying makes, and he had darted outside. Okay, he had darted outside while that was happening. Now, this was not something that I just automatically put together, except that I realized that the last time somebody had been frying something on the stove, because it's not a form of cooking that I normally use. I'm much too lazy to actually make things in pans. So that the wretched smoke alarm in the house had gone off and wouldn't stop. And Ricky was stuck in that part of the house with me and was petrified until we were able to beat the thing down with a broom handle and get it to stop. And that had actually happened a couple of times. So it dawned on me that what Ricky had put together was this unusual sound of frying in a pan with this horrible noise that he found terrifying. I mean, he'd been shaved. He was reduced to just a quivering mass for hours after the smoke alarm had gone off for a long time. So I realized that what I was doing was trying to force a terrified dog back into the lion's den. Mm-hmm. Partly based on, I was having my own meltdown, but partly based on seeing his behavior as somehow reprehensible. It was the only thing he could do. He had tried to get away. He had tried evading me. He had done his best until he was finally reduced to saying, "Stop that. I can't do it." And I think that every bit of evidence that we have, particularly about warning behaviors in dogs, is that they come from this kind of motivation of what a wonderful trainer, Denise Herman, who I believe is on this call. I think Denise is on the call, coined "please don't make me bite you" signals. It's what they've got to try and communicate that before they go to the last resort.
I loved this story because my dog in recent years has, every time we cook something on the skillet, he scampers away and runs and hides under the bed as far from the kitchen as possible.
I bet you got a smoke alarm.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's been 2 years that he's been doing this. And again, it's not being outside and trying to force them back in, but I can so clearly visualize in my own situation how that could have happened. But usually he has this escape route. And very recently we had up a baby gate and he couldn't get to his escape route. He couldn't get back there. And I realized he was like cowering by this baby gate, like, "Please let me go, run away to the farthest room in the house." And he also begs for food. So whenever I'm cooking, I'm like, "Great, yeah, go run away, because I don't want you to actually try and eat this chicken I'm frying," or whatever it is. But reading your story, I realized in our last house, we had a smoke alarm that was so sensitive. It would go off, I mean, if you blew out a candle, and it was like lights, and it would yell, "Fire, fire." And like it was in a big apartment complex, and it was so loud. And I was like, I wonder, I mean, there's no way to know, right? But reading that story, I had so much more empathy for my own dog's experience I've never questioned that behavior. I never forced him to be in the room where there's sizzling food, but we know how strong classical conditioning is. We know how strong associative learning is. And so
especially fear.
Especially fear. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say.
It's so sticky. Fear is just so sticky.
Yeah. And it stays for a long time. It's something that it's in there, and it is really tricky. It is really hard. I'm really glad that in the book you talk about how we know that desensitization and classical counter conditioning work, and making sure that if you are going to do that, that you are going through the correct protocols for that, which is important. I'm glad that you mentioned that in the book as well.
Yeah. I mean, if it weren't all fear, if all of these things, that we see as warning behaviors, if it weren't all fear, then desensitization and counter conditioning wouldn't work on it, and it does. Which is the diagnostic bottom line. If it weren't fear, desensitization and counter conditioning wouldn't work. And if done properly, it always does.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, you recommend a couple of books in your book, but Fight and Mine by Jean Donaldson are two of the books that you recommend. Those are such fantastic resources if you're looking for counter conditioning and desensitization protocols. Jean Donaldson has recently released a second edition of her book, Mine. We did an author interview with her not too long ago. So I would definitely encourage anyone who wants some more practical hands-on suggestions or training protocols to go check out those books. But I also wanted to mention that there is a book that you told me just yesterday or the other day that you have recently read that you loved. Do you want to say a little bit about this book that you loved?
Yep. Let me back up and say a little bit about Fight and Mine, because if you're looking for the step-by-step how to fail-safe protocols, this is where to look. This is the how to do it. The look closer is about why to do it. Really, it's really the book about why. And why it's the fair and decent way to go with your dog. So those are you will not go wrong following those protocols.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I usually ask authors, and I guess I skipped this question at the beginning, like, who should read this book? Is this just for canine professionals? Is it just for us dog nerds who want to have another book that we read on our shelf? Or can your average pet guardian read this book and understand it? Who are you hoping reads this book, Janis?
I'm hoping for both. I really am. And it was a fine, kind of tightrope to negotiate in writing the book, because I want it to be accessible and useful to both to understand. It's really a book about how we as humans perceive and respond to dogs, less than being about the dogs themselves. So about how and why to have empathy for dogs when they feel the need to warn us that's something that is scary to them is happening. So, and to really deconstruct how that works in the relationship, and how it determines how we see them and what we do. And that's important directly for the pet owners, but it's also really important for dog pros to communicate to their clients, to frame the way that they explain the client's dog's behavior to the client in a way that's going to build empathy in the client rather than frustration at what the dog is doing because it doesn't make sense to them. So it's about making sense. It's about making sense of that. The other book that you mentioned, that was on the next slide, is if you don't read closer, read Away to Me.
Yes.
It's a and you might ask yourself, why is she telling us to read a murder mystery? And I read zillions of them, and it's a quite entertaining murder mystery. But it's definitely, worth the read for on that account. But it tells story after story after story of a dog professional helping people to understand exactly the kind of empathy that I'm talking about in Look Closer to clients whose dogs are struggling with, how they can get along with each other. It's just it's just beautifully done for that.
Yeah, I have my copies sitting right here. I was very lucky enough to receive an advanced reader copy before it was released, and tore through this book and had the opportunity to interview Patricia McConnell to talk about this book. So that is also on our YouTube channel. You can watch the replay of that interview if you want to hear a little bit more about that book. But do yourself a favor, go get that book, Dogwise, which actually brings me to my next point, which is that we are going to share a coupon code with all of you who have stayed tuned to the very end. So we want to thank you for joining us. Any of the books that we do live interviews on are available at dogwise.com, and you can save 20% at checkout if you use the code FBLive20. So thank you all, everyone who has joined us today. Thank you so much for coming. Janis, thank you for your time today, for your thoughtful answers to your questions, and for this delightful book that you are sharing with all of us. Can't wait to see you all again next time.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you everyone for coming.